When we find fossils in caves like this, they are often very fragmented. How do we know how to put the pieces together? If we are missing pieces, how do we know what they would have looked like? Dr. John Hawkes, a paleoanthropologist, shows off his clay skull that he created from only a few crucial pieces of a fossil.
What I've done here is I've taken 3D scans of all of the pieces of the Neo skull that are easily identified and that make up most of the area of the skull. And Neo has the complete mandible and much of the upper teeth and jaw. The mandible, we have the condyle, we have preservation of the temporal bone where the condyle sits. So we have another point there. And you could say, well, I've got a stable base here. This is a triangle, and the skull has to have had this shape. Without that kind, and it's super fragmentary, right? There's only pieces of this. I've got a piece of the cheekbone. This is a zygomatic bone. And I know that it belongs over here somewhere, but if I put it on this, I'm just sort of, well, it's got to be kind of somewhere over here, right? How do I go further? How do I try to ensure some kind of accuracy? To begin with, the parts that I study and that I compare to other species are the parts that exist. In science, we're using the knowledge that we have to build a model that has more detail to it, and ideally, we find more evidence and test that.
Dr. Hawkes talks about how he used 3D imaging to create a full picture of a fossil. A similar idea was shared by Dr. Kenny, a researcher in South Africa.
That is a puzzle, trying to fit all the pieces together. Some of the pieces will go back together again, others not, because you might be dealing with more than one individual or more than one animal. And the only real way to know that is to get them out of the block itself. But a general rule is, or what I found is that if you have all these pieces in a single block, it's most likely that it's one individual. I mean, we've spent years studying the human body, for example, so you know if you see a skull, if you see an ulna, what pieces need to be there. So you can sort of like imagine 3D scan the bone and the block itself and sort of fill in the missing pieces. So essentially it just comes down to your knowledge of anatomy and morphology.
Paleoanthropologists often talk about bone clones. Let's break this idea down. Like Dr. Kenny shared with us, bone fragments are like puzzles. So when a researcher finds a fossil fragment, it's simply another puzzle piece. Like Dr. Hawkes explained, they can create clay casts or use 3D imaging and create full fossils from pieces by extrapolating what it should look like given the fragments we have. Additionally, we can often compare multiple specimens from the same species and put it together as if it were one individual. So let's wrap up. We learned from Dr. Hawkes that we can create full casts of skulls from only small pieces of fossils. Let's keep learning about the different fossils and evolution.